Fruit for thought, recovering the original fruits of the Spirit and harvesting it/them today. Written by Art Edwards. Copyright 2022. This clip and narration were performed by Casey Evans with permission from the author. Author's note: some names and locations in the author's personal stories have been changed. These events happened pretty much as described, at least in my memory. In the midst, in the middle, and in between. Who doesn't crave peace? In a world filled with chaos, conflict, and crises, there are moments when we would give anything for peace. Whether at a cabin in the mountains, on a walk by the ocean, or in a field of daisies gently blowing in the wind, we lust after peace. The words we most often associate with peace are quiet, calm, silence, and absence of conflict. Peace is essential to our well-being. Everyone needs a Sabbath. Jesus frequently sought out alone time. I'm in favor of alone time, quiet, and getting away from it all to find it all. Go ahead, rest, relax, and recreate. But you may want to think differently about the fruit of the Spirit Paul calls Eirene. Kicking off our shoes, disappearing into a couch, cradling a remote, and cracking open a bag of chips may help us. But these are not the things Paul had in mind when he described peace, Eirene, as a fruit of the Spirit. Paul's understanding of Eirene. The word Paul used for peace is Eirene. Its root, eiro, means to join or bind together what has been separated. Paul returns to this theme of being one again and again. As it turns out, Eirene, the peace fruit, is a little like Kara, the joy fruit. True joy comes when everyone's joy is full, so peace too is a shared experience rather than an individual one. Paul emphasizes the unity that is found in Christ. This kind of unity brings together Jew and Gentile, Greek, male and female, slave and free. And it is in bringing all these groups together that people are reconciled with God. To put it more simply, we can't be one with God unless and until we are one with our neighbor. Nobody feasts on the fullness of God while alone. I figured this out during a blinding flash of the obvious while on my couch just a few weeks ago. I realized it takes at least two people to make, find, or experience the peace Paul wrote about. Peace, Eirene, comes when people with different goals, ideas, and standard operating procedures move beyond self-satisfaction and come together in harmony as part of one community. There's no peace unless there's a crowd. Eirene does not suggest the kind of self-soothing peace that allows us to spend an afternoon in a mountain meadow where the only thing intruding on the quiet is the chirping of crickets. I doubt Paul ever spent time in a mountain meadow listening to crickets or gazing at his navel. Instead, his peace and quiet were disturbed by his own blinding flash of the obvious, complete with audio, while on a dusty road to Damascus. As a fruit of the Spirit, peace is always inextricably tied to unity, order, and justice. None of these things come easily. But as any 4-year-old will tell you, if things are not fair, embodying justice, there will be no peace. More on the connection of peace and justice later. In Paul's view, or my view of Paul's view, Eirene is active, not passive. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of everything that makes for the highest good. Frederick Buechner said it best when he wrote, "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of love." Eirene has more to do with bringing order to chaos than with becoming comfortable in chaos or avoiding it. It has more to do with making peace and reconciling than with rest and relaxation. Bearing this fruit of the Spirit means enabling peace by standing between warring factions, family members, friends, enemies, or strangers. In biblical times, villages used to have an official called the superintendent of the public Eirene. This job took work. I wonder if, over the years, it evolved or devolved into what we know as justice of the peace. Nevertheless, the connection of peace with justice survives in this title. When seen this way, pursuing real peace, as Paul saw the word, requires moving into the midst of conflict. This is harder for some than others. While growing up in my family, there was no disagreement too fierce, no conflict too intense, and no distress too great that we couldn't sweep it under the rug. Sometimes at work, in the neighborhood, at church, with my kids and with my grandkids, it's easier and simpler to sweep tension under the rug and hope it will dissipate on its own than it is to engage with it and work toward a shared understanding. Eirene does not mean stuffing things into your subconscious and seething in silence. Instead, Eirene values a community's unity or harmonious relationship above individual desire. When understood this way, the choices of whether to mask or vaccinate are no-brainers. What I may want, my personal freedom, is not as important as what a community needs to keep it safer. Bearing the fruit of the Spirit called Eirene also includes breaking down symbolic and physical walls. It means facing hostility in hopes of an eventual reconciliation. There is no peace without reconciliation. Paul was always working towards reconciliation, bringing conflicting people together into one community, into one body. He does this in the opening lines of his letters. But first, a short digression. More than a half of the books in the New Testament are attributed to Paul, 13 or 14 of them. The consensus of scholars operating way above my scholarship grade is that only 7 of these books were written by Paul. By the way, attributing a book to someone in Paul's day was considered an honor, not plagiarism. All 7 books written by Paul and all but one of the books attributed to him have the same phrase toward the beginning of the letter: grace and peace. Grace and peace became Paul's catchphrase. Why does opening with grace, charis, and peace, Eirene, matter? Back to the Greek. Charis is the first cousin to the word for joy. Charis, or chara, grace/joy, was the traditional greeting in Greek correspondence. It was like, dear sir or madam. In addition to its Greek meanings, Eirene, peace, is a translation of the Hebrew shalom, the traditional Jewish greeting. By connecting these words, Paul makes it clear he intends to bring people from different cultures, Greek and Hebrew, together. He addresses his diverse congregations with words they would instantly understand. In doing so, he brings together distinct greetings from people frequently at odds with each other. It would be a bit like beginning a fundraising letter with, "Dear Democrats and Republicans, Paul is a peacemaker and a reconciler from the very first words he writes every time." But there is even more to the meaning of Eirene. It also has a sense of working for the kind of peace that is only possible when it includes a full measure of justice. Without justice, there can be no peace. There is only a hierarchy of power and privilege where those without power suffer. Similarly, it is never possible to achieve either justice or peace by belittling someone. We shouldn't sacrifice justice just to keep the peace. Neither can we sacrifice peace to impose our view of justice, as some people mouthing the phrase, "no justice, no peace," do today. They say the right words and take the wrong actions. Oscar Romero, the Archbishop in the city of San Salvador, described peace this way: "Peace is not the product of terror or fear. Peace is not the silence of cemeteries. Peace is not the silent result of violent repression. Peace is the generous, tranquil contribution of all to the good of all. Peace is dynamism. Peace is generosity. It is right, and it is duty." Oscar Romero and Eirene. Life for a reconciler like Oscar Romero is seldom peaceful. When he was appointed Archbishop of San Salvador, many in the church were disappointed because he was neither a Marxist nor a conservative. He did not believe in a left-wing and a right-wing church. He believed in one church. At that time, the left-leaning part of the church was obsessed with liberation theology. Romero said that he had never read any of the books about it. However, neither did he blindly support traditional Catholics. The Archbishop stood between the warring camps, bringing schism to the church. He wanted those in the church to recognize they were one, Catholic and Marxist. He put it this way: there is only one church, the church that Christ preached, the church to which we should give our whole hearts. There is only one church, a church that adores the living God and knows how to give relative value to the goods of this earth. Oscar Romero passionately worked to serve the poor and hold the government accountable for its abuses. He did not advocate revolution, but tried to wage peace. He knew there would never be peace throughout El Salvador until there was justice. In a speech in Belgium in 1980, he described life in his country this way: "In less than 3 years, more than 50 priests have been attacked, threatened, calumniated. 6 are already martyrs. They were murdered. Some have been tortured, and others expelled from the country. Nuns have also been persecuted. The archdiocesan radio station and educational institutions that are Catholic or of a Christian inspiration have been attacked, threatened, intimidated, even bombed. Several parish communities have been raided. If all this has happened to persons who are the most evident representatives of the church, you can guess what has happened to the ordinary Christians, to the campesinos, catechists, lay ministers, and to the ecclesial base communities. There have been threats, arrests, tortures, murderers, numbering in the hundreds and thousands. But it is important to note why the church has been persecuted. Not every priest has been persecuted. Not every institution has been attacked. The part of the church that has been attacked and persecuted is the part that has put itself on the side of the people and gone to the people's defense. A month after this speech, Oscar Romero celebrated Mass at a small chapel at Hospital de la Divina Providencia, Divine Providence Hospital. This church-run hospital focused on oncology and a ministry for the terminally ill. After his homily, he stepped away from the pulpit. He stood beside the altar and prepared to share the sacrament of Holy Communion. While standing there, a red automobile stopped in front of the chapel. 4 people who were part of a group called the Little Angels, yes, you heard that right, exited the vehicle and burst through the chapel door. Oscar Romero was killed by a single bullet through the heart. The assassins returned to their car and drove away. No one was ever prosecuted for his murder. At the end of the month, more than 250,000 people attended his funeral mass. This was one of the largest demonstrations in the history of Latin America, but it was not safe. There were more than mourners at the funeral. Bombs were set off in the crowd. Sharpshooters on the roofs of nearby buildings fire into the masses below. Somewhere between 30 and 50 people were killed that day. Consequences of Eirene, then and now. People who seek to bring justice that must accompany peace are seldom welcomed by those in power. Those who support peace are always taking a risk. Sometimes just showing up is all it takes to put peacemakers in danger. Understanding Eirene as this kind of active reconciliation gives an entirely different meaning to some of the last words Jesus spoke to his disciples. In John 14:27, he says, in my paraphrase, I'm leaving you with a kind of peace that the world doesn't understand. He isn't telling his followers that they will have an easy life. He's offering to leave them the kind of peace that is born of justice and forges a new relationship between the powerful and the powerless. This kind of peace is never found sitting on a flagpole, living in a cave, or meditating behind a wall like an anchorite. In the category of timing is everything, we do well to remember Jesus spoke these words at the end of the Last Supper, just before his betrayal, trial, and crucifixion. He wanted his friends to know they were empowered not so much to be peacekeepers as to be peacemakers. Bearing the fruit called Eirene means being a peacemaker and a risk taker. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, not those who are at peace, for they shall be called the children of God." There's no guarantee that peace will come to those trying to make peace happen. Romero certainly didn't see it. Peace may not come for us either. But in the meantime, our hearts need not be troubled. Eirene is a fruit of the Spirit. It leaves us secure, without fear, able to step into conflict, and willing to pursue the justice that gives birth to reconciliation by bringing those who are in conflict into harmony. You know who they are in your life. We can bear the fruit Paul called Eirene, and in doing so, ensure that Chara will be full for all. A note from the author. Thank you for listening and viewing the Peace Eirene chapter of Fruit for Thought. If you enjoyed today's clip, then a hardcover print copy of the book can be purchased by searching for Art Edwards' Fruit for Thought on Google, Amazon, or store.bookbaby.com. Grace and peace, Art Edwards. Scripture. Peace, Eirene, I leave with you. My peace, Eirene, I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. John chapter 14, verse 27, King James Version.